Welcome, everyone. My name is Carmi Matson. I'm the manager of public programs here at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank. Thanks for coming tonight. I know it's a gorgeous night out, so you must be very committed to this topic, right? How many of you are brand new to Conversations with the Fed? This is the first one you've ever seen. Oh, excellent. Thank you for coming. And who's our veterans? I know, yep, thank you, veterans as well. We're excited about the topic that we have for you this evening. I think that you probably are too. We are bringing to you Guy Berg. He is the Vice President of the Payments Standards and Outreach Group here at the Minneapolis Fed. He leads our bank initiatives supporting improvement of the U.S. payment systems, including business-to-business payment efficiency and payment security. His group is also the group that is responsible for performing payment fraud mitigation research and emerging payment technology research, which he's going to talk to us about tonight, including blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Just a few words of housekeeping before I turn the stage over to him. You do have at your place settings a copy of his slides. You also have a copy of an evaluation form. We love to hear your feedback. We do these events quarterly, as some of you know, so we'd love to hear more about what else you're interested in hearing about from us. We've also got a brochure there about the Fed's structure and a couple of flyers for our Hamilton campaign. Hopefully you noticed the banners on the plaza on your way in and the banners that we have outside in our lobby. You're welcome, if you couldn't make the tour tonight, to come sign up for a special Hamilton tour. We also, our next Conversations with the Fed event is happening November 1st, and that one is going to be about Hamilton and his central bank and how that compares with the Federal Reserve System today. So we hope you'll come out for that one as well. And in fact, our guest speaker is present in the audience tonight. Neil Willardson will be our next speaker, so we hope you'll register for that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Guy Berg. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you, Carmi, and thank you everyone for coming on such a beautiful night. I thought that would be a good chance there'd be crickets and just 5 or 10 people here just having such a beautiful September so far. Before I launch into the presentation, I'd like to get a little bit of feel for the audience. How many people here in the audience are this is a first presentation that they come to about blockchain or Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies? Okay, so about half. Okay, now how many of you are experts in the audience? We've got 1, 2 experts. How many of you are enthusiasts, not necessarily experts, but enthusiasts? Meaning that you're in the group that believes that blockchain is the cure to just about every disease, as well as most business problems that are out there today. And that's the way it is when you go to a lot of conferences these days. Blockchain is really the buzzword. It's the draw into the conferences. And usually there's at least 1 or 2 jokes that come out about how blockchain could cure the cold, potentially. Just give it time. So tonight, I'm not going to try to prove how blockchain can cure the cold. I knew this audience was going to be a mixed audience in terms of those who've had some experience and those who've had no experience whatsoever. So I've had to keep it at pretty much a fundamental level. Before I go any further, whoops, I hit the wrong button right away. Let me get that. See if I can hit the right button this time. Okay, so before I go any further, I have to make the disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this presentation are those of me, the presenter, and not those of the Federal Reserve System or any particular bank within the Federal Reserve System. So this gives me the leeway to say pretty much whatever I want. I've got it out on it. So if there's any media or anything in the room, please remember this is my opinion, not that of the Federal Reserve. So before I go on then into this presentation itself, Carmi did a good job of talking a little bit about what the Federal Reserve does relative to payments, but most people don't think of us in terms of our role in payments. They think of us in terms of our role in monetary policy, in supervision and regulation, economic research, not necessarily in the payment side of it. So on the payment side of it, our mission is really to foster the integrity, the efficiency, and the accessibility of the payment system. And we do that in a number of ways. One is through the leader catalyst role, and that's where we act, basically my group in particular, engage with the industry from all parts of the country, not just within our particular district. And we try to identify where there are ways that we can improve the system by working together. And we're really a catalyst to try to spur. We'll educate. We'll go out to conferences and we'll share what we've learned from other industry participants, what we're learning from our research to try to see what ways we could advance the improvement of the U.S. payment system, whatever that might be. Then there's a service provider side of it, and the service provider is our Fed wire services, our Fed ACH services, Fed cash, our check processing services and things like that. And finally, there's a fiscal agent. And the fiscal agent is where we provide various services to the Treasury and other government agencies. Now, within that, as Carmi mentioned, my group, we work on B2B payment efficiencies, we work on payment standards, so securities, payment security standards, payment efficiency standards, interoperability. We also do fraud mitigation research and the emerging payments research, which is the area that this particular presentation comes out of. So tonight I had to look at what am I going to talk about. There's so much that you can talk about relative to blockchain. I could spend an hour and a half, 2 hours on blockchain itself. I could spend a couple hours on cryptocurrency itself. So what can I talk about in about 45 minutes? I decided I needed some type of a focal point. So I came up with 5 points that I want to cover. First of all, I want to get across the point that Bitcoin gets a lot of media attention. But you've probably heard this before. It's the enabling technology behind it. It's the blockchain behind it. It really has substantially greater potential for impacting society as a whole. And that's not to say that Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency at some point couldn't have a very significant impact, but just the number of ways in which blockchain potentially could have an impact on society is substantially greater. And I'll talk about that a little bit tonight. And what is it that blockchain brings to the table? It's a new trust model. And so I'll talk about what is that trust model and how does it achieve that trust. And then I'm going to talk about something that might be for those blockchain enthusiasts or maybe blockchain purists, especially your public blockchain purists, is that there's some challenges in the governance model. And because of that governance model, and I'm speaking about governance kind of broadly, and what does it take to organize and establish and implement a blockchain? So there's some challenges in that area. What are those challenges? And why is that maybe preventing more rapid adoption of a blockchain technology? And then finally, I'll be talking about the cryptocurrency application of blockchain, which is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin was the first implementation of blockchain. It's the first cryptocurrency out there. So in a lot of the examples I'll be giving tonight, I'll be using Bitcoin-related examples. And that's just because it's the one that most people are familiar with. Most people can relate to. But I'll also try to bring up some other ones as I go along. I'm going to start out then talking about the Internet of Value. I think I went too far here. The Internet of Value. Don Tapscott wrote a book, and in it he had a quote that says, "The first generation of the digital revolution brought us the Internet of Information. And the second generation is going to bring us the Internet of Value." So what does he mean by that? I think before we jump into the Internet of Value, let's talk a little bit about the Internet of Information. The Internet of Information was enabled by these protocols or this platform called TCP/IP, HTTP, and SMTP. Right? Most of you may not be familiar with that technology, but that was a platform that enabled the exchange of messages over the Internet. So suddenly it was very easy for us to seek information in the Internet. So remember back in the day when we had to get a book to learn something new, or we had to go to a library, or heaven forbid, we had to seek out an expert, ask them to gain information about a particular topic. Whereas now, I think if we have a question about something, what do? We Google it, we Bing it, we go to the Internet, and we do a search, and we try to find out everything we can about that topic. And we get a lot of information from it. So it's really transformed the way we get information. In many ways, I look at that first generation, the Internet of Information is a great equalizer for information, right? It provides potential, even greater potential than what's achieved so far, to expand education to anyone who has access to an Internet. Now, what is it going to mean from a Internet of Value? That could be a hard one to imagine right now. I've had a colleague who I've been working with on this topic for a while now say to me just the other day, I don't quite get that Internet of Value topic. What are you going to say about it? I said, well, I'm not sure that I completely get it yet either. Other than think about that Internet of Information now transferred to the Internet of Value. So what if we can now exchange value as readily and as easily as we can exchange information today? And we can do it peer-to-peer. So some of you may use online banking applications to be able to send money to somebody else. And you do that by going through a bank. Your bank, their bank, somehow it goes through these trusted third parties and that value gets exchanged. But what if you didn't have to go through those banks? What if it was that we could exchange value directly? Whether it is money, or it could be some other asset. And when you think about the Internet of Value, I think they're thinking beyond that. What if it gave you the way to monetize things you were not able to monetize before? Your information about yourself. There's many companies out there would like to have your information. What if you were able to put that information on a blockchain and make it so that you could selectively determine, first of all, who you'd sell that information to, you'd receive revenue from it, or maybe you're not going to sell it, you're just going to selectively determine who you're going to make that information available to. Now you can do the same type of thing with medical information. There's many types of information out there right now that you've just never thought of a way to monetize because there wasn't really a way to do it. But the blockchain technology is something that will enable doing that without having to go through a third party. And that's what he means by the Internet of Value. And what is that going to mean? I don't know that there's anybody in this room who can really accurately forecast or predict what that's going to mean. And at the very end, I'll be closing on that particular topic, our ability to really project well what's going to happen in innovation in the future. So what is this? What is it that blockchain actually introduces or provides or brings to the table? It's a new model of trust. It's a model of trust that doesn't rely upon a central authority. Okay, we're used to working through banks or other entities where there's a central authority to authorize, authenticate the transaction that is happening. What Adam Draper says is that the one thing that blockchain brings is mathematical proof that something has happened. Now, I don't think that's enough personally. Now, it does bring a formula, they call it a consensus algorithm, that facilitates a very complex calculation that proves that this work has been done and authenticates the information. However, that alone I don't think achieves the trust that they're talking about, trust without a central authority. I think you need other things. I think you need a way to have some level of fault tolerance to make sure that information isn't lost, because after all, if you have the information but you lose it, how much trust do you have in it? Second, if you have this information, how do you make sure that the information is accurate and nobody's gone in and manipulated it? So there needs to be a way to protect that data in a way that if somebody did try to change it, it'd be detected right away. And finally, I think to gain the level of trust you need from the public is there'd have to be a level of transparency. If it's all done in a black box behind the scenes and nobody could see what was there, do you really trust it? Maybe, maybe not. Actually, in some cases in blockchain technology, people are uncomfortable with the level of transparency that's out there, and it actually has become an inhibitor in certain cases. So all these things together have to happen. Now, how do you bring all these things together? What is it that blockchain does? What's the technology that brings this all together? Now, I'm really simplifying this, so those experts in the audience, please understand this. I look at it as there's three primary components. A fourth one that gets a lot of play and really enables many additional things. I'll talk about that too. But the three primary components is the consensus logic out there. That's this mathematical problem. And it really dates back to the late 70s. If you're in mathematics classes, there were these mathematics agreement problems out there. And it basically takes the basis of these agreement problems and creates a mathematical expression for proving that a piece of work has been done and establishing an agreement across parties. So there's this component of it, and then there's this blockchain data. And this blockchain data is a way to provide that protection against manipulation of the data. Essentially what it is a cryptographically linked. It's not encrypted, it's cryptographically linked data. So that if someone were to take that data apart or take a piece away, it would be detected. And then the third part is something called a distributed ledger. And some people refer to blockchain technology as distributed ledger technology. And what all that is really is a ledger, just an accounting ledger. So now let's put all these components together. Imagine all of you, if you went out and you bought a computer. Let's say you spent $1,000 on a computer. And you're going to load it to become a blockchain or let's say a Bitcoin miner. So all you do is you download this Bitcoin mining application onto your computer. That computer then would suddenly have this consensus algorithm on it, that logic. It would have a ledger on it, and it would have that blockchain data format on it. And all of your computers would have it. And what happens is when the first transaction comes in, all of your computers start racing to come to the answer, to complete this mathematical problem. And the first one that completes it wins the ability to add that block, and this is why they call it blockchain, add that block of data to this storage area, which is called blockchain, onto the ledger itself. And as soon as that happens, that ledger gets replicated across all your computers. So that way you get fault tolerance. If this half the room, something happened, you lost power, and you didn't have any battery backup, this half the room would still have all the data. When you came up again, you could get back up to speed and get back to the right state of data again. The next thing that I think I want to point out in this particular thing is that a lot of people think of Bitcoin, so they think of money. And as I was mentioning earlier, you could use information, your personal information, your medical records, all kind of information that could be this transaction. So it could be an asset transfer, right? A title to real estate, to a car, automobile, or something like that. Or what it could be is that I'm in a supply chain blockchain application, and I'm delivering parts to a particular area, and when I deliver those parts, there'd be a sensor that would scan the product. It would automatically trigger a payment to me, the supplier of that particular product. Now that automation is something that's called a smart contract. The smart contract is a very powerful piece of logic that any type of agreement that you want to establish between you and whatever party this blockchain is designed to set up for, it will automatically execute under certain conditions. And then that result will be logged to that blockchain. And no third party or central authority had to be a part of it. Because all the computers in this room, all your computers, were going through the same calculations to prove and authenticate that that transaction occurred. So that's this whole trust model, the fact that you've got, first of all, this consensus algorithm. Second of all, that once it's been computed and the block of data has been added into the storage area, you're assured that nobody's going to tamper it. So it's protected. And the third thing, you've got that fault tolerance, so that if most of the computers go down, you still have a few computers. The likelihood of all computers going down, especially in a public blockchain where computers could be all over the world, and they are all over the world in the Bitcoin case, the likelihood of everybody losing power at the same time is next to nothing. Now I'm going to go a little bit further into the blockchain data just because it's such an important aspect of the blockchain. Now, how many people here are familiar with the term cryptography and what cryptography is used for? Okay, so cryptography typically is used to mask information, right? You're going to hide the information so people can't see it. But there's a couple other things that cryptography is used for. One is for protecting the integrity of data, and the other is used for authentication. So the way blockchain uses it, it could use it for encryption. A lot of people mistake the fact they think that data on the blockchain is encrypted. Well, it could be encrypted if you design your particular application to encrypt it. But in the pure sense of a blockchain, it's not encrypted. It's in the clear. And all the cryptography is used it's used to link this data. So let's say that I went in and I tried to manipulate the data in block 2. Next time there's a transaction that happened in your distributed network here, my computer would come up with the wrong answer, and therefore it would be rejected. And that's how it provides that data security. So every transaction that gets added to this is linked to all the historical transactions. So anything that gets changed along the way at any point would be detected, and that ledger would be rejected. Now, there's more than one type of blockchain out there. The public blockchain enthusiasts, those that were most involved, let's say, with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies out there, like the idea of a public blockchain, where essentially what happens is that you've got all these computers out there. Anybody who wants to, all of us in this room, again, we could go out, buy a computer, download the application. There's certain specialty hardware that you have to get, and you could start mining for it. And why would you do that? You do that because if you actually succeed, you're in this race and you're the first one to reach the conclusion of this problem, you actually get paid 12.5 Bitcoin at this point in time. So that's right now, at the price of Bitcoin, that's not a bad sum of money. Back when it was $19,000, every time you won one, that was a good sum of money. Over $100,000 every time that you won it. You need that type of incentive program to get your processors because you don't have a central authority. A central authority, a Visa, a MasterCard, the Fed Reserve operating ACH. There's a central authority that purchases all the processing equipment and supplies it, right? In a public blockchain, there's nobody out there buying all the equipment, so somebody else has to buy it. The public, whoever's going to participate in this processing of it, has to buy it. And they're not going to do that unless they get rewarded some way. And so they get paid, in the Bitcoin case, every time they successfully win that race to get that block to add to the blockchain, they get paid in, at this point in time, 12.5 Bitcoins. Now, in a private blockchain, you don't have that problem. So you don't need that incentive program. So in a private blockchain would be, let's say that any one company could say, gee, we have a need for a system that provides strong protection against data manipulation. We have a need to automate some processes to eliminate some manual efforts that are involved through a smart contract. And maybe you need something that has strong resiliency too, or a lot of resiliency. Whatever your business cases are that end up fitting a blockchain, you can decide how many computers you're going to have this across your blockchain, where the computers are going to be, what's the secure facility. You're going to give access privileges and permission to those who want to participate on. So the level of trust that you have to establish in that isn't as high of a bar as in a public blockchain. And as a result, what happens is you can put in less sophisticated consensus algorithms. Instead of having this race of proof of work, they call it, consensus algorithm, you could have a round robin. Well, computer 1 does it this time, computer 2 does it next time, computer 3 the next time. You could be proof of capacity, proof of burn rate. There's all kinds of different consensus mechanisms that can be used. But the point here is in a private environment, it doesn't have to be as sophisticated because it's an environment that you have greater trust in. Now, that being said, you still want to err on the side of security. So if anybody hacked into it or got into it, that you still have a strong level of security in it. And then, of course, there's something in the middle of that, and that's where it's a consortia. So you'd say you have a consortia of banks, or it could be a consortia of corporates that are going to put together a supply chain blockchain application. So they can all pool together and get the benefits. What would be the primary reason for implementing a blockchain for supply chain management? It's usually so you can track parts Or one of the most frequent examples people give is, what if you're a grocer, you're Walmart, you're Target, you're Cub Foods, and you want, and there's some type of food poisoning breakout in your store. If you had the ability to say, well, gee, I'm going to go back in this blockchain and see where that came from, you could track it down to the fields much more rapidly than you could before. So it's tracking that provenance. And one thing that I should point out in this point is that blockchain by this doesn't do it all by itself. Just like the internet without your mobile phone isn't as powerful as it is with the mobile phone, right? And so you have to have all kinds of sensors out there to facilitate these types of things, such as supply chain tracking and things like that. All of these additional capabilities, there's usually going to be sensors or other things that help authenticate to kick off a transaction that goes onto the blockchain. Now, there's many, many things that you can do with a blockchain. So I brought up a few: the supply chain management, land and real estate titles. Automobile manufacturers could store their maintenance records on there. How many times I've seen it where people have manipulated the odometer before they sold it. They maybe have not been completely honest about how many times they took it in service. So automobile manufacturers are actually looking at how can we create a blockchain so that every time somebody goes into their dealership, that it would be loaded onto blockchain, and therefore it would be then considered the truth of what's been happening out there. So a lot of people say what's stored on this blockchain, because this consensus algorithm and the process they use, it's storing the truth. And that truth is only as good, of course, as the information that gets put on there. Now, airlines also are looking at using it to track parts for jet airlines when they're building it. Where are the parts? When can we expect them? Where did they come from in case there's a defect in them? How many defects did we experience from that particular supplier? So there's a lot of things like that on the private side of it. And on the public side, there's just as much. I mentioned the idea of what if a musician could sell their music directly to you and not go through any type of intermediary? What if the self-sovereign identity management we talked about, or self-sovereign medical information management? There's many, many types of blockchains on the public side. And of course, the most popular one for people to talk about is the Bitcoin blockchain, which is a public one. So we could go on and on and on about all the different things that blockchain could do. It's not there yet. There's a few examples. There's lots of proof of concepts out there. But beyond, let's say, the Bitcoin, the number of the cryptocurrencies that are out there, there aren't a lot of them that have, or very many at all, that have really gone into production phases of it. And why is that? I think one of the biggest challenges, especially with the public, is the whole governance model around it. I was at a symposium that the Federal Reserve held in San Francisco, and one of the founders of Ethereum was there, and he was speaking, and one of the things he said, it really struck me. He says, one of the greatest challenges to blockchain is the whole concept of mass coordination. So you don't have a central authority to try to coordinate the people, right? Organize them, design things together. You've got this mass of people that are not connected in any particular way, and you're going to try to get them to move together on something. So there's a lot of challenges relative to designs, with the standards of appeal. I heard of a situation where a trucking company was looking at implementing a blockchain, but the first thing they had to do is come up with a set of standards of what it was they're going to put on the blockchain. Well, the only way you're going to do that is you have to bring a bunch of people together to agree upon what it is that you're going to put on that blockchain. So there's a lot of coordination that has to happen. And if it's a public one, that means it's even more. Or you have the opposite, which would be similar to what happened with the Bitcoin situation, where a developer or a group of developers go huddle up on their own and they develop all the rules. And then they make it available, but everybody says, well, trust me, we've got all the rules taken care of them. They'll protect you. And then they have to get some type of viral internet type effect to get everybody to jump on board and join that application. Those are the business community is finding this is very, very difficult to achieve. And even I think you're seeing that within the virtual currencies, because even though Bitcoin has a lot of people investing in it, it's a very, very tiny percent of the population. And try to get more of them involved in it, right now there isn't the level of trust out there. And there's some more things having to do with governance I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation that I think it makes it a little bit difficult, not to mention the fact that you've got to change legacy business models out there. So far in the presentation, I've covered the fact that blockchain, I hope I've gotten the point across, there's tremendous potential out there, much more than just the idea of a cryptocurrency. Second of all, that it introduces this new trust model that enables trust without a central authority. And then there are cases where this governance model makes it very difficult. The fact that you don't have a central authority actually makes it difficult to get it going. If you do get it going, it's great, but it's very, very difficult to achieve. So now I'm going to talk about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin more, some of the things that are happening there, and then a little bit more about the governance model and what some of the challenges are relative to that from the perspective of gaining the trust and keeping the trust of the public. The first thing, though, and the big debate out there is what is a cryptocurrency? And I think you could probably find 100, if not 1,000 different definitions of cryptocurrency. I put two different ones up here, and there's a couple key points on them. The first one is from the European Central Bank back in 2012, and this is one of the ones I've liked the most. I like the fact that it says that it's issued and controlled by its developers, right? So, central bank issues money here in most countries, right? Fiat currency. This is saying the developers would come up with a methodology for both issuing and controlling the currency. Second thing on there is it's unregulated, which means there's no protections for the consumers or anybody who's interacting with it. Then the second definition out here from the Board of Governors, a couple of the Federal Reserve, which I find is really interesting, is first, it's a new type of asset distinct from any other traditional form of money, that it's not a liability of any individual or institution, and no trusted institution is standing behind it. So I thought these 5 points together really are critical points for what is a virtual currency. Now, virtual currencies, I think the other issue with them is that they can be many things, and they can be transitionary, right? So let's talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin came out, and the intent was it was supposed to enable peer-to-peer payments without the need of a Visa, MasterCard, or any bank sitting in between it. But then it started to become more of an asset, more of almost like an equity. People were investing in it to see what they could get for valuation returns, right? And so is it money to use for exchange of goods, or is it an investment asset? A lot of these start out with one objective, and they turn out with a different objective. Or if you have something like Ethereum. Ethereum is a crypto coin. It also can be used to create other crypto coins. It also is used, they talk as a fuel for other blockchain engines. So fuel meaning it's something that incents others to process for that particular cryptocurrency. Right? So there's many different things out there. And what's interesting, in any day, if you go out on the internet and look at a number of these sites that try to track how many cryptocurrencies out there, there's a wide range. There's anywhere between 1,900 and 3,800 cryptocurrencies out there today. And they die and are born on a monthly, if not maybe even on a weekly basis. So it's very hard to keep track just how many of them are out there. And oftentimes they're out there for ICOs, initial coin offerings, which is basically a fancy form of crowdfunding. And when you invest in it, you get tokens, or it could be considered a cryptocurrency, a crypto token, as a chit, so to speak, for your investment into that, in hopes that you'll get return for that someday. So I don't have time to go into all these, but there's many, many different ways that the cryptocurrency is used in different purposes. Going back to the blockchain, if we look at today, how does a credit card or debit card transaction perform? If you're going to purchase something off Amazon, that transaction goes through, first of all, it's a merchant acquirer, goes through then to the Visa, MasterCard, and then from there, it's going to go to the bank where your account is, and it's going to get stored there. So there's at least two, in reality, there's probably minimum of 3 trusted intermediaries that are part of that process. So the intent of Bitcoin was to make it so you could eliminate those intermediaries. So now if you're going to purchase something from Amazon and it was going to use the blockchain network, it would go directly from you to Amazon. And it would happen instantaneously, and Amazon would immediately then ship you the goods. In reality, that's not the way it's working. And in part, it's because there's a lack of trust in the system out there. So what's happening is that there are some trusted third parties that are starting to come about, providing what we call acquiring services out there. So if I'm a merchant out there, and Amazon or whoever it might be, and I'm putting a price to my product, if I'm going to price it to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin today is 6,000, tomorrow it's 5,000 or maybe 5,800 or whatever, I've lost some value on that, right? So the longer I hold that cryptocurrency, the greater risk I have of either going down, or it could be the exact opposite. Last year, I could have been making lots of money because it kept going up in valuation. But you didn't know which way it's going. So what's happened is a lot of these acquirers, these exchanges have developed this acquiring capability so that, hey, if somebody purchases something with Bitcoin, we will immediately exchange it for fiat currency, for US dollar. So you don't hold that Bitcoin for any length of time whatsoever. So we remove that risk. So ironically, there's third parties that are stepping in addition to the fact that cryptocurrency, for a lot of people who are not technically astute, dealing with a wallet feels uncomfortable. And when you have to store keys for your wallet, and if you lose those keys, you lose the money. You lose the Bitcoin or whatever virtual currency it is that you had. And so what's happened is exchanges have developed these wallets, and they start managing the keys for you. So there's another trusted third party coming into it. So ironically, even though Bitcoin was really initiated to try to eliminate the need of third parties to be involved, third parties are having to get involved to either gain the trust or make it easy enough for people to participate in. So some of the challenges with Bitcoin today, there's technical challenges and non-technical challenges. First of all, on the technical challenges, scalability. Think of it this way. Visa data center can do about 50,000 transactions per second. Now, a study that was just an internal study with the board that I recently read said that they looked at transactions over a period of time. They found that the average transaction for Bitcoin was about 10 minutes. Now you see variations of that, and it's going to depend upon the volume that's happening there. But at any rate, it's an order of magnitude difference, right? And right now, the Bitcoin community is challenged to look at what can we do to try to speed up this processing and reduce the cost of the processing too. So they have a scalability issue. Second thing is energy consumption. So when Bitcoin hit its peak price, the energy consumption for that processing was equivalent to a year's worth of energy in Ireland, right? And if Bitcoin was a country, it would be ranked 38th in the amount of energy it's consumed in a year. So there's a very significant problem if this were to grow and grow, the energy consumption. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to find a way to change that consensus mechanism to reduce the amount of energy and computing power it takes to do that without compromising the security. And there's lots of innovation. There's lots of things trying to figure this out there, but they're a long ways from getting there and achieving it. Third, there's security. Now, security has a technical aspect of it and a non-technical aspect of it. But in this one of the biggest issues out there is Bitcoin, unfortunately, and Ethereum, other currencies, but Bitcoin in particular, has been an enabler of ransomware. IBM performed a study, and they saw that from 2016 to 2017, I think it was, that there was a 6,000% increase in ransomware emails. 6,000%. If they didn't have a medium that's anonymous like Bitcoin, could they do that? Not likely. So Bitcoin can be an enabler of illegal activity, such as ransomware. Now, there's other aspects of security, but I want to make it really clear. The blockchain security itself, there's theoretical attacks on it, but there really hasn't been a successful attack on the blockchain data, that cryptographically linked data in the blockchain itself. That has proven to continue to be very secure. There's something they call a 51% attack, meaning that if we had this room here, if this half of the room plus they recruited, let's say 10 people from this side of the room, to all maliciously attack the ledger in the same way, the majority of them would have this fraudulent result, and therefore it would take over, right? But that hasn't been feasible at this point in time, except for the fact that something that's happening. Ironically, with Bitcoin, what's happening is that miners are becoming very large. And so there's a few miners out there that have the most processing power. And so ironically, it's becoming a centralized processing right now. It's not intentionally, it's just happening that way. Because if you're the one that has the most processing power, you're winning the most races, you're getting more money, you're investing more into more processors. And so what happens? You start to dominate. And that's one of the things that's happening. So there's a fear out there that at some point, that there's going to be a few of them that are going to dominate enough that they could successfully pull off this 51% attack. Now, but for the most part, the blockchain has been very secure. What's not secure is all these services around it. So that intermediary, that the acquirer exchanges, or just the exchanges themselves, where people are putting out their wallets, where they're exchanging the Bitcoin for Ethereum, Ethereum for Ripple, and all these different things like that, they're getting hacked. And you can see on here, there's a number. There's the Bitfinex, $77 million are lost. BitGrill, $170 million. Mt. Gox, $450 million. That was in Japan. Coincheck, $535 million. So in these exchanges, they're getting hacked, and data is being stolen. So there is security around the perimeter of the blockchain and all the services that are built around it. There's also been denial of service attacks to the point that Ethereum has had to create a new fork, we'll talk about in a second, to protect themselves from that type of attack. And then there's the fact that you could just lose the money yourself. I have purchased a variety of crypto coins. I've got my passwords and my keys stored in a couple places. Well, I don't use them every day. It's been months since I've done anything. And at some point you start to, well, where did I put that? And did I put it in a secure place, or did I put it someplace where somebody else could hack my computer and get it and take it anyway? Right? So there's some issues around that in the security side of things. So then the next thing is the non-technical changes. So volatility, the lack of a clear governance model, the processing costs, the broad acceptance, the lack of regulation. So is Bitcoin a tulip? That's a 17th century reference to when tulips had this bubble. Everybody invested in tulips, and all of a sudden the bubble burst and they had nothing. So the joke out there is Bitcoin a tulip, or is it money? And as you've seen from the last year and a half, there's been tremendous volatility. And which way is it going to go? It's lost, I think, in terms of overall value, all cryptocurrencies together, their value in this last year, just in 2018, has lost close to 76% of their value, if you take all of their market cap values together. The fork. What is a fork? A fork is a situation where a cryptocurrency decides that they have to change the rules of it for one reason or another. And when they do it, if it's a hard fork, you have to decide, I'm going with the new rules, or I'm staying, and it's not backward or forward compatible. So you have to make a decision. You have to go one way or the other. Now, this is something that happens fairly frequently. So, and there's situations where there's this Bitcoin XT that was initiated, tried to increase the speed of the transaction. It had I think it was like 1,000 nodes or like that, and eventually died out. Then there's a Bitcoin Classic that has practically died out. Now there's Bitcoin Cash, which has been one of the most successful forks, and then there's Bitcoin Gold. And part of this has to do with you got this community of developers, they're not sure which way they want to go. Do they want to be an asset like gold, or do they want to be a currency for purchases? In Ethereum actually has planned forks at different points in time, and they've had forks to address replay attack and denial of service attacks. So the point here is that there are changes that happen in the rules. The rules don't always stay the same. And when they make those rules, guess what? It could go back and it could potentially change what was on that data. So this immutability, if there's a fork, in theory, it could be mutable. So that brings up the point that, who is it? If it's the developers, if it's this group that nobody really is sure who it is, and they're making decisions about this forking, it creates a concern about trust long term with it. If you've got issues with volatility and there isn't anything like a central bank in there trying to maintain some level of stability of the pricing, again, you've got issues with potential trust. So just in the last few slides, I hope I've got the point across that there's the governance models. When it's not clear out there, you can establish this trust, but there's this governance model. When something goes wrong, or if you have to change something or fix something, it starts to erode that trust. And if you don't understand it, it starts to erode that trust. Whoops, I hit the wrong button again. So what I want to close out on then is two things. I've just talked about the cryptocurrency and all the challenges, technical and non-technical challenges. The fact that it's really not achieving the ideal that it was looking to achieve. Excuse me, we'll get all to it. But there's still hope, because right out, the amount of investment going into blockchain is substantial. And even the ICOs, there have been more ICOs this year in 2018 than there was in 2017. And the top 50 blockchain venture capitalists have invested over $637 million into blockchain technology this year. Right? So the point is there's challenges out there. This isn't moving as quickly as people would like it to move, but there's tremendous investment in there, and they're looking and they're evolving the system. They're evolving the consensus mechanisms to try to make it so that it's going to fit a wide variety of business applications. And that's going to take time. And what do I mean by that will take time? I think if you look back at the mobile phone industry, the first mobile phone was actually developed in 1973. First one is commercially available in 1983. Remember the brick? Anybody around who remembered the brick out there? It wasn't something you really wanted to carry around much. At that point in time, how many of us thought that we're going to carry around this handheld device that would have internet access, that would give us maps, become our navigation unit, that would become our cameras, that would become our watches, and all these other things? I don't think any of us thought of that. There might have been a few futurists that could come with that, but it's very difficult. And blockchain is very much in, let's say, I'd say probably the late 80s, maybe the early 90s stage in its development. You've got one big Bitcoin type poster child out there. You've got a lot of virtual currencies out there. You've got a number of blockchains and the proof of concepts, but we're just scratching the surface of it. And so who knows what it's going to be in 10 or 20 years? And how long is it for this internet of value to start permeating our lives? I think it could be, and a lot of the enthusiasts may not like this, but I think it may be another 10 or 15 years. Even though the innovation is speeding up, the problem is you've got legacy business mindsets. You have consumer behavior changes or business behavior changes. It takes a lot to get the adoption. Technology is usually ready 10 years ahead of time. Payment by phone has been available since 2008 or earlier. What percent of the population are using Apple Pay or other Samsung Pay or those right now? A very, very small percentage, and there's a relatively small percentage, they say 50%, I doubt it's that much, of merchants that will accept a mobile phone payment. Yet it's been around for 10 years. So I'd like to end this presentation just saying that keep in mind, innovation takes time, and it usually exceeds our wildest imagination as to what it achieves. Thank you very much.
So if you have a question for Guy, if you could raise your hand and wait until we bring you a microphone.
So what's the algorithm to determine the value of Bitcoin itself? Is that observable, and can you model it?
So the proof of work algorithm, is the Byzantine algorithm. I mean, if you're a mathematics major, I can't say that I know the details of it, but it's generally, these algorithms are publicly known things, but it doesn't mean, it's like cryptography. You need to know what the algorithm is to make sure that it is secure enough. And there's there's many different types of proofs out there, and they're changing all the time. Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you for a good presentation. So with the launch of the Gemini USD this week, we now have USD on the Ethereum blockchain. From your perspective, do you think that the Federal Reserve will issue USD on its own blockchain eventually? Or are we heading down the path of Amazon USD, Facebook USD, something pre-Civil War, where each individual organization, company, or bank is issuing their own blockchain dollar?
Or I should say pre-Fed Reserve, when we had thousands of banknotes type thing. And will there be a lot of, let's call it, non-fiat, so non-government backed currencies out there? No question. There's 3,800 possibly out there right now. Is the Fed Reserve or any other central bank around the world going to enter into space? At some time, possibly. But right now, I think the thing you have to look at about is the stability. I mean, something that a central bank offers to the public is stability and trust and confidence. And right now, the state of virtual currencies, from our perspective, has a long ways to go to achieve a state of stability that it would be something that could be taken seriously to any extent. So who knows what will happen in the future, but there's a lot of improvement. The other thing that when we look at this is we're trying to say, what problem does it really solve that other technologies couldn't already solve? And most of the time, other technologies could solve the problems, even international payments. There's other technologies that can solve it. It's not the technology, it's the legacy business models that are actually preventing that from happening.
Can a developer of a cryptocurrency create currency for its own benefit and inflate the cryptocurrency, unlike the Federal Reserve?
Oh, there's no question about it. So any entrepreneur out there can basically have an initial coin offering, create their own cryptocurrency, and get all these investors in it, and then close it down and run, because it's unregulated at this point in time. They might get lynched for doing that, but you look at the DAO. In the DAO, what happened with Ethereum is essentially one of the developers in their group saw a loophole in their smart contract algorithm, and he exposed it, and they just kept pulling more and more information, more and more money out of it until I think it was something like $60 million he pulled out of it. Didn't break any laws. He figured out the loophole in that particular smart contract. And the community said, well, gee, he didn't break any laws. He was a smart developer, saw a loophole. And what happened is the community there's a lot of tension at the point, and they decided, well, we're going to fork. We're going to have the DAO Classic and then the new one, and hard forked it going forward. So there's already cases out there where people have profited from these unregulated virtual currencies. Any other questions?
Well, Article 1 of the Constitution, I think it's 1, gives the United States government the power to establish and regulate currency. Bitcoin is, because of the nature of Bitcoin being non-centralized at all, it really can't be regulated in the same way as I think Utah or somewhere tried to put gold coin out, and the Treasury came down on that. But it's not a money at this point, but it is a money. And is there any conflict there, or is it not being discussed?
Well, there are a number of countries, China in particular, that has actually put regulations against cryptocurrencies there. And there are different states that are requiring licensure of money service operator licenses for exchange operators and things like that. So there's a number of ways that you start to see regulation come into play. And I think that where it cannot shut it down, what it can do is create lots of barriers for it to gain greater momentum. At this point in time, there hasn't been any significant effort. There's only been effort when there's seemed to be a need to provide protection, and they've been doing it more on a state-by-state basis by creating different regulations within the states. Any other questions?
Thank you. Are cryptocurrencies still being used to buy things in the black market, or are we seeing cryptocurrencies being used to buy things that are more mainstream?
Well, there's opportunities to buy mainstream. There's a number of websites, overstock.com, a variety of them out there that will accept a cryptocurrency. And as I mentioned earlier, what's happening is that there's these exchanges that are becoming what we call acquiring in the payments business. So anytime a merchant sells something, even in a store, there's an acquirer. There's an acquirer is basically a business entity that takes that transaction from that terminal and sends it off to the Visa, MasterCards of the world, and then off to the bank. So that type of an exchange acquirer is happening for these cryptocurrencies. So, and that's happening especially for internet purchases. So the opportunity is there. You know, when the value is going up, not many people are doing it because they're losing out. Oh, gee, I don't want to. When it's coming down, they might be more apt to do it. But the volume of transaction is very, very small. Yes.
So Bitcoin's monetary policy is essentially limited to 21 million Bitcoins.
Right.
What does the Federal Reserve think about this monetary policy? Potentially this is a monetary policy that may be better than the Federal Reserve. Do you think that that's going to compromise the Fed's monetary policy at any time?
Well, the only way it could compromise or have any type of impact on monetary policy overall is if it gained enough momentum, there were enough transactions. Let's say if it became 30% of the transactions in the United States, then suddenly there would be a potential issue with it. But in terms of, I don't know if the Bitcoin community even knows. When it hits that 21,000 limit, what's going to happen? Are they going to fork it? Are they going to, what's going to happen at that point? So that's a very hard question to answer. In terms of the Fed Reserve, I don't think the Fed Reserve is looking at in any way and say, gee, we need to study this and understand how that would impact our monetary policy, because I think it's really on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. We have economists from around the country that are studying and trying to understand how do we improve our monetary policy, right? That's what every day they come into work and they're looking at the economy and trying to understand what can we do to feed into that monetary policy process. So it's an always ongoing improvement. Now, if something were to happen and take off in a virtual currency and they got enough momentum, enough volume of the purchase within the country, then suddenly we would need to take a much closer look at what the potential impact is on the stability of the financial system. I think that's where we would be looking at versus how it would impact our monetary policy.
I think we have time for one more question right over here.
This might be similar to the answer you just gave to that question, but I was wondering if there are people who have explored if the concepts such as inflation or interest rate or other variables that we track that are related to the amount of money just flowing in the economy would be like in a world where we didn't have fiat currency anymore, just in a world where we just had cryptocurrency? What would could those concepts make sense as in
Yeah.
interest and such?
Yeah, it's an interesting question about what would be the impact on inflation, you're saying, in other typical econometric models relative to monetary policy. That's a very difficult question. I'm not an economist. I don't think I'm qualified to comment on that. The one comment I will make, though, is back in the was it December of last year when Bitcoin was peaking. It's recently come out that there actually was manipulation happening in the marketplace to help inflate the value of it. So you have to keep in mind that the criminal elements are very creative. And we find this in every payment system. They find ways, they find cracks to wedge in to somehow defraud the system. And so I don't think you'd find a payment security person in the country, possibly in the world, who would believe that there's going to be a payment methodology developed that will be completely secure. It's just how secure can you get it?
Thank you, Guy.